This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast about all things innovation in the people space. I'm Kyle Rode. Let's start the show. Welcome back, Rebel HR listeners. Extremely excited for the conversation today. With us, we have Dan Michelson. Dan is the author of a new book with maybe the best title ever, Holy Shift, Moving Your Company Forward to the Future of Work. It is out and available where books are sold right now. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Cal. I needed to come up with a title that would rival the name of your podcast. And hopefully I've hit the mark or at least come close.
Well, thanks. Yeah. And you know, all kidding aside, you know, I get a lot of pitches for guests, and, you know, I'm honored to have people that want to talk to me. When I saw the title of your book, I was like, okay, I got to learn more about this. And then once I dug into the approach and the premise, I was really, really excited to talk to you. So thank you for spending some time with us today, and can't wait to dig into the book a little bit more.
Awesome. Let's roll.
All right. So, you know, I think the first question that I ask many authors that we have on is really a question around what motivated you to write a book about moving your company forward and the future of work.
It was very personal. And I really do think people misjudge work in general, right? They kind of try to draw this artificial line between their personal and professional. It doesn't really exist if you really care about and you have a passion about the work that you do. So for me, Kyle, and I think, you know, you have a little bit of this background, but let me just kind of maybe rip it apart a little bit. So for the last 10 years, I was running a pretty high growth company. So we had grown it from 50 people to 500 people. It checked literally every box in terms of financial performance, customer performance. And then when it came to the employee side of it, and I think this is hyper relevant to the audience that's listening, we were one of the top 20 companies in the world on Glassdoor. So think about that for a second. Now, let me kind of go back in time. When I first walked through the door, this company had been around for 15 years, and they had, I think I got the number right, about 43% employee turnover the year before.
Oh, wow.
That is crazy, right? So to think of a company coming from where it was to where it, you know, where it ended, at least for me, in terms of my time there, that 10-year arc was pretty significant. But during that time, COVID hit. And initially, because we took a little bit different of a course, if you remember the timing, on March 14th of 2020, we told our employees in an all-hands meeting that not only would nobody lose their job or take a pay cut, but they'll probably all get bonuses this year. And we delivered on all three of those. So we said it and delivered it, even in all that chaos and confusion. With that said, so great culture, great company, you know, yada, yada, yada. Well, time marches on, the great resignation hits, and then all of a sudden, boom. Maybe because we had such a strong culture, when people left, it had a bigger impact than it would have otherwise. All of a sudden, our Glassdoor ratings started to plummet. And I was thinking, like, if I'm struggling with this, I think everybody is. So maybe this is an opportunity instead of a threat, right? Like maybe this is a moment, like a holy shift, right? In not only how we work, but how we live as well. And maybe there needs to be a pullback on this, right? So let's really understand the moment and take a comprehensive view and approach moving forward. I was coming up on 10 years, as I said, with that company. It was time for me to take on a new challenge, and I thought this could be the one. So I left the company and just spent months and months just putting thoughts down and creating a framework and doing research, which we can talk about, which all led to the book and the title.
Absolutely. You know, and I think, you know, I appreciate you spending the time to put together the book. I know that, you know, we'll talk about this, but you've put it into a format that is intended to be extremely pragmatic, right? Something that you can actually use as a toolkit. But I think, you know, we do want to pause for a second. I think every HR professional that just heard you say you're, you know, top 20 Glassdoor is like, they're like, you know, you had me at top 20, right? Like that is, we spend a lot of time, you know, kind of focusing on that. And I think, you know, so, you know, congrats on that. And congrats on the book and the book release. I know, it's got to be a passion of love, because it would never get done, right? Because there's so much into putting a book together, right?
But I do want to say something to this group of people, right? HR and the folks who work in that area tend to be very passionate and compassionate people. With that said, the last couple of years has been extraordinarily hard for that group of people. They have bore the brunt of not only, change in how we work and live, but also social change, political challenges. I mean, like, there's been a whole variety of things that have hit this group and have been extraordinarily difficult. With that said, I think that's the moment that we're in is where HR can really take the lead. And that's really what motivated me to kind of lean in on this area and really try to be, instead of just provide empathy, provide a direction that people can go in and leverage. So, once again, because it's an HR group, there's two things I need to say. This is not a story about hitting the peak of Glassdoor. So we did well, great, but this is also a story about the valley, right? And, where we were, where we got, and maybe where we ended up, were not, necessarily easy places to be along the way. And I think anybody who leads an HR team or is in that role in a company understands that nuance. The other thing I'll say, just because it appeals to the audience, is all the proceeds from this book are being donated to Feeding America. So I didn't write this book so that I could, kind of pound my chest. I wrote this because I felt like I needed to, and that these were things that could help people and that I really wanted to share. So this book is definitely tactical and practical. These are things that you can do, you can pick up tomorrow, in 20, 30 ideas you can pull from the book and instantly implement them. That's why it was written the way that it was. Yeah.
Absolutely. And appreciate that, the donation to Feeding America, and I think just appreciate that kindness there. I want to talk a little bit about your approach. So I know that you conducted a significant amount of research as you were putting this book together. So walk me through how you approached that research, and ultimately how you came out with kind of the distilled contents of the book.
Yeah, let me zoom out just for a second. So just to give your listeners some context, the company I was leading in healthcare, which is where I was, a company called Strata before I left to go down this path, was one of the largest healthcare data companies in the world. So just to give you some context, when I talk about data, really what I mean. So it's not just here's a data point. It's really getting into the depth. So what I did, Kyle, is I went as deep as I possibly could. I teamed up with YPO, which some people may know is the largest association of CEOs on the planet. So there's 33,000 CEOs that are part of it. And I did research with a representative sample representing close to 100 countries, 97 different industries, and approximately 1,700 CEOs. So really big depth, small companies, large companies, manufacturing, tech, and everywhere in between. And what we found out is, the one thing that was universal, which is pretty fascinating, is that there was a crisis of confidence in regards to the company culture. Everybody was seeing and feeling this issue. And at the same time, they understood that they can get through it in the short term. They knew they can manage. But in the long term, they were super concerned about what that would mean to the arc of their company over time. So that was kind of the context. I did my own research, the primary research, which I just referenced. I pulled in McKinsey data, McKinsey & Company data, one of the largest consulting companies in the world, Gallup data, which I think everybody knows that within the HR space, and really did a meta-analysis looking at studies of studies to try to find and understand, one, what mattered the most, and then two, what things correlated most directly with solving those problems.
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself get frustrated too. Why? And this as being one of my best friends is, hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, you know the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
Absolutely. So, big data set, right? I appreciate the diligence that went into it, right? Because I think I think many of us would think we could probably have an idea of what moving your company forward would take and what the future of work might look like. But you've actually done some of the deep dive. When you have this massive data set and you're trying to put this into a book or a format that somebody can go out and start to leverage as a tool, how did you start to sort through the data that you focused on, and ultimately what led you to some of the insights? Because I know there's a couple key kind of approaches that you recommend in your book. So how did you tackle that problem, and ultimately how did you get where you did?
Yeah, the key to velocity is simplicity, right? So if you really want to affect an organization and drive change in any company, it has to be super simple, right? It just does. So a lot of the policies that HR rolls out, or programs that HR rolls out, or applications, et cetera, as you know, get utilized by a very small percentage of employees. And then they get optimized by an even smaller set of employees. So it's super frustrating, right? Because they're well-intentioned. So what I was trying to do is to say, okay, you can hand this to your board of directors. You can hand this to your senior management team. You can hand this to anybody on the front line. You can hand this to a manager, and they would all have the same kind of context and takeaway from it. So really, if you look at it from a company perspective, if you're in HR, you're kind of like, okay, listen, what ultimately matters the most? And from an executive perspective, I can tell you, because I've been doing strategic work for a couple decades, it's when it comes to employees, it's number one, not in any order, but three things. Number one, employee productivity. Number two, employee engagement. It does matter. You don't only want people to be productive, but you want them to want to be there, right? And do their best work. And then lastly, retention. No surprise. You want them to stay, especially your top performers, obviously, right? So the question was really simple, Kyle. Once you understand or agree with that, which seemingly everybody does, everybody who at least I've come across, what correlates the most with those three things? Pretty simple question, right? And so what I did was try to draw correlations to those things. Like what does the data show you correlates the most with those three things? And so it turns out there's four things which I could walk through, and I call them core. So there's four things that are core or correlate the most with the three things that matter that I just outlined, right? And those four things are an acronym, core. Community, do I feel a sense of belonging? And this is all of these are data driven, but they're also common sense. Okay. So I interviewed every single person that came to this company I was running for a decade. Okay. I didn't weigh in on the interview. I just want them to meet me, and I want to meet them because I want to get that connection going, before they joined versus after, because it obviously matters, in terms of their decision of where they come or they stay or they go. And I think our acceptance rate was close to 94%. So pretty good. So from those interviews, and then I did every exit interview of an employee that ever left. So this is not normal CEO behavior. But from that, common sense would tell you community matters, right? So people are like, boy, this seems like a great place and I want to be part of it. Now, community also applies in our personal life. It's very easy, Kyle, to leave your neighborhood. It's really hard to leave your neighbors. Mm. It's really easy, let's say, you're in college. It's really easy to leave a college or a campus. It's really hard to leave your friends. And it's really easy to leave a job, but it's hard to leave your colleagues, especially the ones that you've developed trusting relationships with. So it's simple to leave a job. It's hard to leave people, right? So community really matters strategically. I'm not just talking from a feel-good perspective. A company needs to be a community. That's going to be the strength of it. Second one, opportunity. Do I personally feel like I have a future, right? So, there could be an exciting future about the company, but if I don't feel like I'm part of it, there's a decent chance that I'll be able to leave or consider leaving. So those two things, community and opportunity, are the only things that HR has any control over. They can help set the tone at that level. So think of that as level one. But what really matters is getting to level two. Level two is that individual impact, right? So R is for relationships. As you know the data better than me, I'm sure, on this one. If you have trusting relationships, you're twice as likely to stay at a company. If you have toxic relationships, you're twice as likely to leave. You've heard that from Gallup over and over again because it's true. So that's an easy one. Not only looking at someone's trusting relationships, but also looking at their toxic relationships. Because when you have challenging relationships at work, it is a cloud that's over your head 24/7, 365. Weekends, it gives you anxiety. At night, it gives you anxiety. And we don't often lean in on that. Last one is experiences. There might be this big opportunity at the company level, and maybe there's a next job for me somewhere down the road. But on an everyday basis, am I getting tangible experiences that are helping me grow? So we often look at training programs versus experience programs. We don't get tactical and practical when it comes to what someone's going to be experienced day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year. And that zoom out, if you look at it, CORE, community opportunities, relationships, and experiences, is a very simple model that gives the company, community and opportunity, those two things to focus on. And then the manager level, relationships and experiences, something to manage, right? Because we all know that someone's experience at your company is 30% driven by the company and 70% driven by the manager. That's just a fact, right? When you think about your experience, some of it is around culture, which is community and relationships, that part of the matrix. And some of it is just about me and my own individual career, right? And that's opportunity and that's experiences, right? So you got to be able to manage into these 4 boxes. And that's really what I wrote about in the book. Is I kind of divided it into 3 sections. So one, and this is basic problem solving 101, but in order to solve a problem, this is the biggest and fastest change in how we work and live in human history. So it's a pretty big problem, pretty complicated place to be if you're in HR, because you're at the tip of the spear, so to speak. So the 3 sections of the book are: 1, seeing the shift. So you got to understand what's changed. And I isolate it down to 3 big changes. Second thing is you got to shift your mindset. So you're going to have to think differently in the future than you did in the past, right? Like you and I were talking a little bit about before. Best practices aren't necessarily best practices anymore, except you're saying this is a best practice in HR according to what and when. I mean, the world has changed significantly. So we're writing a new book, right, of best practices. It's not going to be the old one. And that's cool when you're in HR because you get to be at that point, that tipping point. And then lastly is making shift happen is what I call it. And I'm saying shift with an F, just to be clear. And that's really what this playbook is. It's like, let me give you this outline core, and then let me give you 5 ideas in each one of these areas that you can action tomorrow with your team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, from my standpoint, I haven't done the research of, 1,700 CEOs and 50 countries, 100 industries, and so on and so forth. But yeah, that is common sense. And I've said this for years where it's like, if you want people to stay, it's fairly simple. Make it a great place to work and make sure they have friends there. And then it's a hell of a lot harder for them to leave, right? Because they have some level of connectivity or honestly, it's kind of like magnetism, right? Like you don't want to pull away from the magnets because you've got this group of people pulling you in. But I love how you framed it. And I want to maybe reiterate that to the group here. So, I think a lot of times in human resources, we sit here and we maybe are a little bit egoic and think we've got to try to solve all these things, right? It's an HR problem. So HR has to try to solve it all. But the reality is we can only control so much, right? We can control the environment. We can control the community and building that type of community that people want to stay in, that neighborhood that people don't want to move out of because they love their neighbors, right? We can make sure that there's appropriate opportunities by making sure we've got the right systems and right org structures, and that we don't have blockers blocking people's success. That we take care of those sorts of issues. But that's about it, right? I love how you focused on that. Like so much of this is on the manager, and that's where I think a lot of us really beat our head against the wall. Is like, well, we can only do so much because a lot of this falls into the lap of the managers. And so I want to talk a little bit about how you recommend we approach that problem. And I know that this book is really written with an intention for us to essentially give it to someone else as a playbook as well. So how do you recommend that we approach that kind of that HR conundrum?
Well, one, I think you just have to acknowledge it. So like I think there's a mindset shift that needs to take place, plain and simple. And that's kind of what I outline in the second chapter. And I really talk about 5 mindset shifts that are necessary. And this is, if you're going to solve the problem, that's where you start. Kyle, to your point, you got to start with how you think about the problem first and foremost. And I'll just do an analog that's more personal because I think that those resonate and make more sense anyways. So if I believe you have kids, Kyle. How many kids do you have?
I do. I have 3.
You have 3. All right. So sons, daughters, both?
2 daughters and a son. Side note for the listeners that can't see this: one of them just ran up and gave me a kiss on the cheek. So that's
how I knew
is making making the assumption.
All right, so we're gonna get really personal. So Kyle, let's just say your daughter was struggling in school, and you went to go talk to the principal, and you said to the principal, "Hey, listen, my daughter is really, really struggling in one of her classes," and the teacher turned to you and said, "Well, Kyle, listen, this is a great school, one of the top rated schools in the area. And that teacher, just so you know, is the highest rated teacher at the entire school." And so, yeah, you would say that's not helpful. So that's like saying our company is great and our team is great. Like that's the equivalent of saying those things. And we won all these awards and look, what a wonderful place to work, right? You would say, or they would say, "Hey, we need to go talk to the teacher." And if you were to sit down with the teacher, in this case, I'm doing an analog here of talking to HR and now talking to the manager, right? So in this case, the teacher is the manager. But if you were to go talk to the teacher and the teacher would say, "Hey, listen, I got to tell you, your kid's wonderful. They're terrific. But of the 29 students in our class, they're the only one who's really not making it work," you would say, "What in the world are you talking about? Do something. I mean, you're there to help, And so the challenge that we have is we have to realize that person, any person, that kid, that person who's a colleague of yours at your company, their experience at your company is them in the circle of people around them. Mm-hmm. And it turns out we all know these stats, but the only person who has a bigger influence on your mental health than your significant other is your manager. That's what the data will show you. So you have got to really think about this. So anyways, let's zoom out and think of like what the mindset shifts are. Like one is we've got to stop thinking of culture as a tactic. It's something that HR can implement alone and maybe try something and put up 3 things and it's going to make a difference. Nope. Culture has to be a strategy and the leadership team needs to be engaged. So HR needs to be the partner, not the sole promoter when it comes to culture. So if you don't have the leadership team at the table, you ain't going to be able to make that pivot. The second one is we've got to stop thinking of like this tactic of just bringing people, quote, back to work, right? So that's the real controversial one. And I can tell you, based on doing a lot of research on this, that the answers can be very different for different companies and different industries and different parts of the world. And the answer or the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. It's going to be different, and that's okay. So whatever you're going to do, you got to make that thing work. But bringing back, well, guess what? You can have a really crappy culture where people are there 5 days a week, or a really great one. You can have a really crappy culture where everyone's remote, or a real great one. So that alone is not the point. You do need to bring people together, right? Right. That really makes a difference. Now, however you do that, there's a lot of what I outline in the book is about how to bring people together. It's not just physically, it's also just bringing them together, in terms of their objectives and their connections and everything that goes with it. The last one that I'll highlight, there's 5 in the book, but the last one that I'll talk about, because I think it's so relevant to this group, is we've got to shift from managing to coaching and really understanding what coaching means. So, it's kind of going back to let's go to your son this time. Let's say your son's playing for a team and the coach is, whatever. It's the end of the year, and you sit down with the coach, and the coach says to your son, listen, I got to tell you, in the third game of the year, in the second half, I really wish you would have blocked that guy out. It would have made a huge difference. You would sit there and go, why didn't you tell them right there and then? Right? Or if the coach just said, hey, great job all the time. If you were the coach of Tiger Woods or any professional player, they would say you're useless, right? So we've got to stop thinking about evaluation as a mindset when it comes to managing, and switch from coaching into conversation, and that kind of collaborative mindset versus the confrontational mindset. That is the biggest shift that needs to take place. So if you're thinking about it from an HR perspective, how do you get managers? Because everyone complains about frontline managers and middle managers that's not doing it. Well, guess what? It's really hard. It's really hard when you've been an individual performer and you just start. We all make the same mistakes. They're totally predictable about not delegating and everything else. Like everything you know is going to happen. Guess what? It's going to happen. So if you're not leaning in and guiding people and giving them time to be nurtured and grow, you're only going to be frustrated, and you'll take this linear kind of perspective and very simplistic mindset of blaming people when they just haven't made the mistakes that you've made and learned the lessons that you've learned yet. So anyways, that's some of the stuff, at least, that I would highlight.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, it's this concept of coaching, I think is a critical one. And we actually just had an episode a couple weeks back about this, that, a lot of times we use the word coaching, but what we really mean is performance management or performance evaluation. And it's different, right? It's distinctly different.
Totally different.
To be a coach versus a deliverer of a performance evaluation that is a surprise.
So I write about this in the book, about how we have performance evaluations and the annual process completely wrong, right? And at our company, we broke them up all into separate parts and pieces so that they wouldn't be muddled together. So the way that the construct has been for multiple decades, and some companies have gotten away from it, is we're going to sit down, we're going to talk about three things. We're going to talk about your performance, we're going to talk about your future, and we're going to talk about your compensation. Well, guess what's going to happen in that conversation? The entire thing is going to be like waiting for the compensation part of it, right? I mean, of course it's going to be, so you're never really talking about growth in a planful, methodical way. You're really not talking about performance in a coaching type of manner. The evaluation seen strictly as what it is in that case, which is this is tied to your compensation, right? And then the growth plan is going to be talking about, well, how do I get promoted? It's not going to be really talking about growth of that individual. It's going to be talking about what's that next job, period. It's not really about development. So one of the big things I talk about in the book is we've got to go away from training programs to experience programs, giving people tangible experiences on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, tangible experiences. Like if I'm in development, being on a sales call. If I'm in sales, spending time with customers, hearing feedback about the product, from a bugs perspective or an issue perspective, getting contextual, having someone who's a potential high performer, a manager, sit down on an executive team meeting. So be a seat at the table. Maybe they present or share something for 5 minutes. Maybe they're just a fly on the wall. It doesn't have to be when something controversial or confidential is being discussed. But, giving people like a seat at the table or let's quote Hamilton, you being in the room where it happens, right, is an experience that you always remember, so we really have to think about experiences that help people grow, not just training.
I love that. Side note, I used that in a webinar when we were talking about seat at the table. I used it room where it happens. And so, yeah, we're on the same page. Well, awesome. Well, this has just been an amazing conversation. I want to shift gears. I'm fascinated to hear your responses to the Rebel HR Flash Round. Are you ready?
Sure. Let's go.
All right. Question number 1. Where does HR need to rebel?
Oh, I think there's an opportunity to, when you have a catalyst, you have an opportunity to drive change. It's the easiest thing. You need that burning platform. This is the best time to be in HR right? Because the platform is burning. The way work which was done in the past is not the way it's going to be done in the future. Flexibility is a good thing. It can be further defined. This individual experience that we've shifted to versus this collective experience is something that can be highly leveraged. And, this idea of HR being a true partner strategically to the rest of the company is super appealing to folks who work in HR. You just got to think about how to reframe that. So I think, the rebel yell, because I know you're into music so much, so we're going to go Billy Idol now. The rebel yell should be loud. I mean, there's a chance to really change things and do it in a meaningful way that isn't self-serving. And I think, and I'll say this to people on this call, is it sometimes it can come across that way when HR is, let's say, complaining that they're not getting the resources or, they're not being included. Like, listen, earn that seat, learn the strategic levers that a manager or a director or a VP or a executive needs to help grow the company and be part of that growth pattern. Because the great thing about your job is if you help people grow, the company will grow. So and if people don't grow, the company won't grow. And so you are the growth engine for the company. Maybe you didn't think of it that way, but you hold the keys.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. My strat plan, it literally across the top in big letters says grow, right? It's like that is one of our strategies as well.
Yeah.
But I think I agree with everything you said. And I think a lot of this comes back to, it's the growth mindset versus the scarcity mindset, right? It's turning something that's maybe something we perceive as a threat into something that's actually an opportunity, right? And I couldn't agree more. Like this is the time for HR to elevate ourselves as a profession and step up and show our organizations what we can do. And there is a burning platform. It's on fire, right? And we're in it. So we might as well figure out how to turn this into something for the betterment of our organizations, right? So couldn't agree more. Question number 2, who should we be listening to?
All right. So I'm going to say 2 because I wrote a book. So hopefully, you'll read it. So I have to say that. The whole goal was for people to read it. So I'll say, listen to Kyle, listen to this podcast, hopefully read the book. I'll say that. And then the second one is going to be surprising to you, Kyle. So I'll say Taylor Swift. And the reason why I would say that is, one, it's a musical reference. 2 is I do think she's an iconic business leader of this generation. And I do think she has earned that respect. And the one thing that she's done extraordinarily well is build a community around her product or her company, however you want to refer to it. And those people feel accepted and respected as one of her, quote, consumers or customers. She really honors her audience in a very authentic way. It has built an incredible amount of authenticity as a leader, because that's what she is. And she's been a rebel. She has turned that industry upside down and figured out a way to monetize music in a way that nobody ever has been close to figuring out. And she has built a set of really, really, really strong leaders around her. Her company is significant. And the people who've been with her have been with her forever. So there's a lot to be learned. Sometimes we look at the same things and the same people and therefore find the same conclusions. In order to think differently and truly be a rebel, you have to think outside the box, which is outside of the HR box, outside of the conventional corporation box. And I really sincerely believe that Taylor Swift has broke conventions in a way that's to be admired.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that song "Antihero." I'm the problem, it's me, right?
Totally. I say that to myself all the time because it's true.
But yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for authenticity. And yeah, I mean, if you trying to drive change, build a community, hey, that's a great example. Yeah, that's the first Taylor Swift that we've gotten to the response to that question. So congratulations, Dan. All right. So we've been talking about this book. I will call it out once again. The book name is Holy Shift, Moving Your Company Forward to the Future of Work. All proceeds go to Feeding America. So it is not only a great book, but also a great cause. Dan, where can people connect with you and reach out to you and learn more and get their hands on the book?
Yeah, so they can reach me directly at dan@incommon.com. So the company's website is www.incommon.com. The book is at theholyshiftbook.com. But I would also have a question for you, Kyle. So maybe on the outro of this, because people don't know this, but the video isn't seen, but I can see Kyle right now. But he has a killer drum set behind him. So when you ask who people should be listening to, I would add you to the list. So I challenge you to come up with a interesting take on Holy Shift.
Okay.
Then you put into a song and add as a riff on the exit of this book, right? So there you go.
Okay. All right.
I laid it down for you. You can't just ask questions. You got to answer questions. Can't just talk about music. You got to make it, buddy.
All right. I like it. I like you, Dan. I like you. Yeah. Actually, so the drums are for my 12-year-old son, but I'll have him back me up and I'll play lead. How about that?
That's even better. That is even better.
Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for putting this book out there and for investing the time, energy, and passion into putting this book together. So going to help a lot of people. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a pleasure and I appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you. We'll talk soon. Take care. All right. That does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.